Oh, there you are. Welcome. You know, actors always looking for new stories to tell. And given the wonderful network I have, I was gifted a couple of books to read. And you know, the beauty of these stories is that they're our stories, South African stories. They come from a time long since removed from the national discourse. A period where slaves made the community of the Western Cape. Today, I think I'm going to tell you the story of Cupido van Mallabaar from 1739. We got the information of his story from the court records.
The trials are important because they document a slice of slavery that previously has not been documented, and they attempt to paint a picture of people who were to a large extent nameless and faceless.
But they do much more than that. They tell us a lot about everyday life because they're very, very full, and the records, and they consist not only of accusations against an accused person, but also witnesses who give evidence. And often the evidence that witnesses give will reveal, almost incidentally, a lot about their day-to-day life.
So you actually have the same incident that happened from various points of view, and all of them would give all kinds of interesting little details about the circumstances in which it happened, and from that you can extrapolate all kinds of fascinating detail about the living circumstances of slaves. You get to know about their daily rhythms.
My lords, the prisoner here before you, one Cupido van Mallabaar, aged approximately 28, did confess of his own free will, without torture or force or even the slightest threat thereof, that the master, Jan van Straten, my master, Sir Jan van Straten, was away from the house for quite a while, leaving his wife and his baby alone, which gave me some time with myself and my thoughts, my miserable, wretched thoughts. After pacing up and down for a while like this and going in and out of the house 4 times, I decided it was time to embark on my plan of action. It was time to end my miserable, wretched life.
Ironically, what they documented was a system of cruelty under the guise of this formal, civilized legal structure.
The Dutch legal system sort of required every person who was charged with an offence to admit their guilt, as it were, to confess. And a confession could be brought about by torture as well. Torture was quite legal in the Dutch system.
Seeing the gun in his hands and thinking it was for her, she cried out in her own anguish, "Cupido, what are you doing? Why do you want to kill me? There is so much wrong with me, Nonye. So much."
The trial tells of enslaved people who wanted to be freed, people who wanted to have the same kinds of dignified lives that we take for granted. They wanted partners, they wanted proper clothes, they wanted to be treated like the human beings that they were.
I am not used to wearing clothes like this. I have worked for you for 3 years now, and still you have not bought one single slave to help me with all the work here. You don't buy a woman slave to keep me company. And yet you and the master, you laugh and you talk and you're so happy, while I am miserable. I came into your bedroom one night while you slept, you, the master and the baby. And I thought I should just kill him right there. But then I realized I didn't want to leave you alone with no husband and the baby with no father.
The facts were fascinating as they unfolded. What showed was the disturbance, the mental disturbance clearly of, the enslaved person, Cupido, who was so unhappy about a range of things, the leather clothes, leather pants that he had to wear, the fact that he really did want a partner. And, when he expressed it, the yearning was so clear in the words. But you also got a sense of his frustration and his alienation and his humanity towards the woman and the child. He kept on oscillating between wanting to kill them and wanting to save them.
What it shows to me is the pain this man must have suffered. The complete, there's a fancy term that slave historians talk about called natal alienation. He was alienated from the place, the culture, the language in which he was born and grew up with, and he was placed into these weird circumstances. The southern tip of Africa, where people spoke Dutch. He was expected to work. He was alone. He wasn't treated well.
Just stay in the room and look after the child. She sees this, and believing she has no option but to save herself or die, "If you do not put the musket down, I will hit you with this," she said. Quite futile, really. But what other option did she have except to reach for the last bastion of status afforded her by the Lord States General of the Free United Netherlands? To assist her with this kind of impudence from the slaves here in this colony of good hope and just governance. The reply was quite unexpected. "Hit me. Come on, hit me. Hit me. Hit me!"
I think mental illness and mental trauma, it has its origins in those conditions. And there's a certain continuity about it. I don't want to simplify things and I don't want to make general statements. I'm not a psychologist. But the extent of the mental trauma came out so strongly. And I think it does have relevance today when we think about the levels of violence in the Western Cape. And we think of the kinds of crimes that people perpetuate. Again, not to excuse violent behavior, but actually to recognize that there was deep trauma associated with slavery. And that trauma we now recognize as intergenerational. There's a huge literature in which they sort of link the past to the present.
Here in South Africa, in the Western Cape, within the context of slavery, every generation that inherits the past is a staging of what that future of inheritance is going to be. So memory here, although we think of it as memory, it's actually a collective experience of a re-emergence of the past.
It would have been better if I just killed you and your husband and your child, flay you all open like a fish, and then turn the knife on myself and do the same. She grabs her baby and flees from the house to go and raise the alarm and bring the full might of the colonial law down upon the slave. No sooner had she left when she hears a gunshot coming from inside the house. Poof! And soon after that, a whole lot of smoke billowing out of the windows. To her mind, and indeed the mind of this court, the most serious non-contact crime had just been committed. Arson. No, Your Honor. That's not what happened. When I came back from outside, after I took a pee, I found that she was gone. And so I tried to kill myself with a musket, but not knowing much about musket and how to manage them, I got it all wrong, Your Honor. I pulled the trigger, the gunpowder went everywhere, the bedclothes, they caught on fire. And all of a sudden the whole place was burning, Your Honor. And I tried to drag the fire out of the house, but it just seemed to catch on everywhere. And like I said, Your Honor, I got it all wrong because I was drunk. And when the neighbors arrived, I tried to make my escape, and I ran away and hid in the bushes. And that's when I cut my throat with the knife.
The role of evidence in Roman Dutch law was very, very important for a range of reasons. The first was to solidify what the colonial authorities thought was their credibility and their legitimacy.
The absolute power and control that the colonists and the state, the Dutch East India Company and later on the British governments, through their legal system had over slaves. Slaves had no rights at all. However, they are being allowed to talk in court.
If you were a slave, you were regarded as not being a free person, so your word was not valued. If you were a Khoi, you were considered to be a heathen, and so as a non-Christian, your word was worth nothing. So in other words, the testimony of a Khoi or a slave was valueless compared to the testimony of a so-called free person.
This is where Cupido was apprehended and brought before the court. For his crimes, Cupido van Mallabaar was stripped and tied to a wheel cross and beaten from the bottom of his body to the top without administering the coup de grace.
I find that, the violence on the bodies of enslaved people has not actually come into the public sphere. It's been erased in very subtle ways.
His then half-naked body was dragged through the streets to the outskirts of the settlement and there left on yet another wheel to eventually die and rot, that the flesh might be eaten by the birds of heaven.
Enslaved people were treated physically violently, either by beatings, and rape, especially when it comes to women.
If you look through the court records of the 18th century, there are no rape cases brought against white men by slave or Khoi women.
And what I worry about is the silent majority. Only a small number of slaves ended up in the court. One of the things that really gets to me is the silent suffering of so many people.
And also the fact that, his sentence, the execution, was a way in which the colonial authorities, the legal system, wanted closure, as it were. But there never was closure because there were so many more Cupidos.